as we celebrate Palm Sunday and enter into Holy Week, the holiest week of the year, I would like us to consider the Aramaic words in this story we just heard, the story of Jesus' Passion from the Gospel of Mark. So you know that Mark wrote his Gospel in Greek, but some of Jesus' words he left in their original language, in Aramaic. And you heard the Aramaic words in the Gospel, right? Surely you heard that chilling prayer from the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. So in the Gospel, Mark thankfully translates these Aramaic words. Of course, Jesus, he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? But just want to draw your attention to that first word, Eloi. Jesus is referring to God as Eloi. And actually, this was a very common way of addressing God in those days. That word, Eloi, would not have been strange whatsoever coming from anyone else's lips. But it's particularly jarring to hear that word come from Jesus, because Jesus does not call God Eloi. Jesus has another name for God. In fact, there was another Aramaic word in the story of Jesus' Passion in the Gospel of Mark, and we heard it. It was mentioned right before Jesus' Passion. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he prays, Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. Take this cup away from me, but not what I will, but what you will. You see there? Jesus, he refers to God as Abba. And that's the Aramaic word for father, or the best translation, Daddy. And this name for God is consistent all throughout Jesus' ministry. Abba. It indicates closeness and intimacy and love. So, in that moment in the garden, before he enters his suffering, Jesus is very, very close to his Abba. He's in that beautiful spiritual space. He's relating lovingly to God as Father. It is not a coincidence that Mark leaves these Aramaic words in his gospel. So Mark is trying to teach us something about the meaning of Jesus' passion. Jesus goes on a journey from Abba to Eloi. Jesus moves, spiritually speaking, from a place of intimacy with God who loves him, Abba, to a place of feeling abandoned by a distant, unfeeling God, Eloi. At the very climax of his suffering, Jesus does not say, Abba, Abba, lama sabachthani. After all those hours of torture in the depths of his agony, Jesus does not recognize or accept God as his Father. So this is so critical for our spiritual lives. How do we refer to God? And what is the name for God revealed to us about our relationship with him? And where are we right now, spiritually speaking? Where do we find ourselves? So maybe we do indeed feel divine intimacy at this point in our lives, in our current circumstances. You know, it's so good to know and to feel in our bones that we have a Father who loves us and teaches us and treats us with compassion. What a blessing to have that sense of what it's like to be in the heart of God the Father. In that spiritual space, we cry out with both joy and relief, "You are Abba, Father." Or perhaps, right now, God is just Eloi. Have we lost our taste for union with God? By the way, that's called being lukewarm. Is there a deep dependence on God or not? So in our relationship with him, is there that trust and vulnerability? Maybe God seems distant, like he's forsaken us in the midst of our suffering and confusion. So in that spiritual space, there's that very familiar prayer, "Why, God? Why are you letting this happen, God?" So in that emptiness, in that pain, that's us calling God Eloi. Jesus wants us to call God Abba. So in other words, Jesus wants us to have a very vibrant, heartfelt relationship with a God who shares with us his love. Jesus wants us to know what it's like to be loved by a Father, to be in his embrace. He wants us to feel what he feels when he prays Abba. And that's precisely why Jesus called God Eloi. Jesus wanted to feel what we feel when we pray, "Why, God? Why have you forsaken us, Eloi?" So Jesus went into our spiritual desolation. He entered into that emptiness in order to pull us out. So on the cross, Jesus left the closeness of Abba to open up a path back to the heart of the Father. And we all sin, and we all fall away, and we all hurt in different ways. And that's when we need to draw close to Jesus on the cross, because he still cries out, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," reminding us that he is with us precisely when we feel far from God. So that haunting Aramaic prayer, echoing down through the centuries, makes us pause to remember that no, God is actually our Abba. We don't worship a God who leaves us in our brokenness and our forsakenness, but rather we worship a God who desires intimacy with us. We worship Abba, and we trust him, and we make ourselves available to him in mind and heart and soul. And so to conclude, I know the reality is there is the cup of suffering, and we all drink from it in this life, and we know very well our own sinfulness and our mistakes, but we refuse to stay in that lonely spiritual space because God is Abba, and his heart draws us. So let us receive, please, that gift of intimacy with God the Father, the intimacy that Jesus won for us by his death on the cross.